August 1, 1969. The San Francisco Chronicle received a letter. But this wasn't just any letter. Inside the envelope was a confession, a boast, and a threat. The writer claimed responsibility for multiple murders. He demanded that his letter be printed on the front page of the newspaper. If they refused, he promised to go on a killing spree. He would take down a dozen people in one night. But what made this letter truly chilling wasn't just the threat. It was what came with it, a cipher. A coded message made up of strange symbols, lines, and circles. The writer said the code contained his identity. He was daring the world to figure out who he was. At the bottom of the letter, he signed it with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it. It looked like a gun sight, target. And beneath that symbol, he gave himself a name, the Zodiac. Newspapers across California received similar letters that same day. Each one contained a piece of the cipher. Each one carried the same chilling tone. The police had no choice but to take him seriously, because by the time these letters arrived, people were already dead. This wasn't the beginning of his crimes. It was the moment he decided the world needed to know his name. And once he started talking, he wouldn't stop. Northern California in the late 1960s was supposed to be a place of freedom and change. Young people gathered in San Francisco. Music filled the streets. It was the age of peace and love. But underneath that optimism, something darker was growing. By the summer of 1969, the Zodiac had already killed. And he was just getting started. His victims weren't criminals. They weren't involved in anything dangerous. They were ordinary people. Teenagers on dates. Young couples parked in quiet areas. People who thought they were safe. The Zodiac didn't follow a predictable pattern. He struck in different towns. He used different weapons. He attacked at different times of day. That made him nearly impossible to track. And then came the letters. He didn't just kill. He wanted attention. He wanted fear. He sent letters to newspapers bragging about his crimes. He included details only the killer would know. He described the victims, the locations, the weapons. He was proving it was really him. The media couldn't ignore it. His letters were front-page news. People across the Bay Area started locking their doors. Parents warned their children. Couples avoided lovers' lanes. The police were under enormous pressure. They had evidence. They had witnesses. But they didn't have a face. They didn't have a name. And the Zodiac? He was watching, reading every article, enjoying every headline. Because for him, this wasn't just about killing. It was about control. It was about being remembered. And he was winning. But to understand how it all began, we need to go back. Back to a cold December night. Back to two teenagers who never came home. December 20th, 1968. Vallejo, California. A quiet town just north of San Francisco. It was a cold Friday night, and most people were getting ready for Christmas. David Faraday was 16 years old. He was a good student, respectful, the kind of teenager parents trusted. That night, he picked up his girlfriend, Betty Lou Jensen. She was also 16. It was their first date. They decided to drive to a remote spot on Lake Herman Road. It was a lover's lane, quiet, peaceful, a place where young couples went to talk and spend time together. Around 11 p.m., another car pulled up behind them. What happened next is still debated, but investigators believe the driver got out and approached their vehicle. David may have tried to drive away. He didn't get the chance. Shots rang out in the darkness. David was killed almost instantly. Betty Lou tried to run. She made it about 30 feet before she was shot 5 times in the back. She collapsed on the cold pavement. A passing driver discovered their bodies just after midnight. The scene was horrific. 2 teenagers, barely old enough to drive, murdered for no reason. There was no robbery, no clear motive, just violence. The case went cold almost immediately. There were no witnesses, no suspects, no answers. But 7 months later, everything changed. Because the person who killed David and Betty Lou wasn't done. And this time, he wanted the world to know exactly what he'd done. July 4th, 1969, Independence Day. Vallejo was celebrating with fireworks and parades. But just outside the city, another couple was about to face unimaginable terror. Darlene Ferrin was 22 years old. She was a waitress, a mother, and full of life. That night, she went out with Michael Mageau, a 19-year-old friend. They drove to Blue Rock Springs Park, a secluded spot not far from where David and Betty Lou had been killed 7 months earlier. It was just after midnight when another car pulled into the parking lot. It sat there for a few minutes, then drove away. Darlene and Michael probably felt relieved. But the car came back. This time, the driver parked directly behind them. A bright spotlight blinded them through the rear window. Michael thought it was the police. He started to get out of the car. Then the shooting started. The gunman fired 9 shots through the window. Darlene was hit multiple times. Michael was shot in the face, neck, and body. The attacker walked back to his car, paused, then returned and fired more rounds into their bodies. Somehow, Michael survived. Darlene did not. Less than an hour after the attack, a man called the Vallejo Police Department. His voice was calm, almost casual. He told them exactly where to find the bodies. Then he said something chilling. "I also killed those kids last year." He was talking about David and Betty Lou. The police traced the call to a payphone. But by the time they got there, the man was gone. Now they knew. This wasn't random. This was a pattern. And the killer wanted credit. The police had a survivor. Michael Mageau was still alive. Badly wounded, but alive. And he could describe the attacker. He told investigators the man was stocky, around 5'8" to 5'9". He had a round face, short brown hair. He wore glasses. He looked ordinary, the kind of person you wouldn't notice in a crowd. But that description didn't lead anywhere. No arrests. No solid suspects. Just a vague image of a man who could have been anyone. Then, on August 1st, the letters arrived. 3 Bay Area newspapers received identical envelopes. Inside each one was a handwritten letter and a third of a cryptic cipher. The writer confessed to the 2 Vallejo murders. He knew details that had never been made public. The type of ammunition, the position of the victims, things only the killer would know. He demanded the newspapers print his cipher on the front page. If they didn't, he threatened to kill again. The newspapers complied. They had no choice. The cipher contained 408 symbols. Strange loops, squares, crosses, and zodiac-like signs. The killer claimed it revealed his identity. People across the country tried to crack it. Amateur sleuths, teachers, cryptographers. On August 8th, a schoolteacher named Donald Harden and his wife Betty solved it. The message didn't reveal his name. Instead, it was a disturbing manifesto. He said killing gave him pleasure. He claimed his victims would become his slaves in the afterlife. He said killing was more fun than hunting wild game in the forest. At the end, he wrote, "I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." The tone was cold, confident, taunting, and then he signed it. With that symbol, the circle and the cross, the Zodiac. The Zodiac didn't stop writing. In fact, he became obsessed with it. Over the next few years, he sent at least 20 confirmed letters to newspapers and police departments. Some were short, others were long and rambling, but all of them had one thing in common: control. He corrected news reports when they got details wrong. He kept a running tally of his victims, claiming he'd killed more than the police could confirm. He demanded his letters be printed or he'd kill again, and he kept sending ciphers. On November 8, 1969, he mailed a new cipher. This one had 340 characters. It became known as the Z340. Unlike the first code, this one couldn't be cracked. Not by professionals. Not by military cryptographers. Not by anyone. For over 50 years, the Z340 remained unsolved. Then, in December 2020, a team of codebreakers finally decoded it. The message was disturbing but didn't reveal his identity. It rambled about his motivations. It mocked the police, It proved once again that the Zodiac was real, and he was still playing games. But there was one more cipher. Sent in 1970. Contained just 13 characters. The Z13. To this day, no one has solved it. Some believe it's his name. Others think it's another taunt. Puzzle with no answer. The letters weren't just about codes, though. He also sent pieces of clothing, scraps of a victim's shirt, proof that he was telling the truth. He drew pictures, bombs, diagrams, symbols. He threatened to blow up school buses. He claimed to be hiding in plain sight, watching children on their way to school. The Zodiac wanted everyone to know he was smarter than them, more creative, more dangerous, and the terrifying part? He might have been right. The Zodiac claimed responsibility for at least 37 murders. But investigators could only confirm 7 attacks. 5 people died. 2 survived. The confirmed victims were spread across Northern California. Different cities, different methods, different circumstances. That made connecting the crimes nearly impossible at first. But there was one attack that stood out. One that showed just how bold and calculated the Zodiac really was. September 27, 1969. Lake Berryessa. A peaceful afternoon by the water. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were college students enjoying a picnic on a small island. Then a man appeared. He wore a strange costume, a black hood over his head, a bib hanging from his chest. On the bib was that symbol, the circle with the cross, the Zodiac symbol. He carried a gun. He told them he was an escaped convict. He just needed their car and some money. Brian and Cecilia believed him. They stayed calm. They cooperated. The man tied them up. Then he pulled out a knife. He stabbed them both repeatedly. Brian was stabbed 6 times. Cecilia was stabbed 10 times. The attack was brutal, methodical. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. Then he walked away, calmly, like nothing had happened. Before leaving, he went to their car. He pulled out a marker and wrote on the door. He listed the dates of his previous attacks. He drew his symbol, and he signed it, by knife. Brian survived. Cecilia died 2 days later in the hospital. Weeks later, on October 11th, the Zodiac struck again. This time in San Francisco. A cab driver named Paul Stein was shot in the head at point-blank range. The killer tore a piece of Paul's shirt and took it with him. Witnesses saw a man walking away from the cab. Police arrived within minutes. They even stopped a man matching the description. But due to a miscommunication, they let him go. That man was never identified. After Paul Stein's murder, the Zodiac sent another letter. Inside was a piece of Paul's bloodstained shirt. Proof, again. But after 1974, the letters stopped. The attacks stopped. The Zodiac vanished. Over the decades, dozens of suspects have been investigated. Some looked promising. Others were ruled out through DNA and fingerprints. But no one has ever been definitively identified as the Zodiac Killer. One of the most famous suspects was Arthur Lee Allen. He was a former schoolteacher from Vallejo. He owned the same type of gun used in the attacks. He wore a Zodiac brand watch with the killer's symbol on it. Friends said he talked about hunting humans. He even mentioned wanting to call himself Zodiac. Police searched his home multiple times. They found disturbing items, weapons, diagrams, but nothing concrete. Nothing that proved he was the killer. Handwriting experts said his writing didn't match the letters. His fingerprints didn't match prints found at the crime scenes. In 1992, Arthur Lee Allen died. The case stayed cold. Then there was Richard Gajkowski, a journalist who lived in San Francisco during the murders. Some investigators believed his voice matched the phone call made after Darlene Ferrin's murder. But again, no solid evidence. In recent years, new suspects have emerged. In 2021, a group called the Codebreakers claimed they'd identified the Zodiac as Gary Francis Post, a man who died in 2018. They pointed to scars on his forehead that matched a police sketch. But the FBI and local authorities didn't confirm their claims. DNA evidence has been tested. Partial profiles exist, but they haven't led to a match. Some believe the Zodiac left behind misleading evidence on purpose. Saliva that wasn't his. Fingerprints from someone else. Others think he died years ago, maybe in an accident, maybe by suicide, maybe from natural causes. That would explain why the letters stopped. But there's another possibility, one that's even more unsettling. Maybe he just decided to stop. Maybe he got bored. Or maybe he realized he'd already won. Because 55 years later, we still don't know his name. The Zodiac Killer was never caught. His identity remains unknown. The case is still open. 5 confirmed victims lost their lives. 2 survivors carried the trauma forever. Families were destroyed. Communities were shaken. And the man responsible disappeared into history. But his legacy didn't fade. It grew. The Zodiac became one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. Books have been written. Documentaries have been made. Movies have tried to capture the terror he caused. Amateur detectives still comb through evidence, hoping to be the one who finally solves it. In 2020, when the Z340 cipher was cracked after 51 years, the world paid attention again. The message didn't reveal his name, but it reminded everyone that the Zodiac was real. His words were real. His crimes were real. The case files remain active. New tips still come in. DNA technology continues to improve. There's hope that one day, science will give us the answer that decades of investigation couldn't. But until that day comes, the Zodiac Killer remains a ghost, a symbol of fear, a reminder that some monsters are never caught. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be feared. And in that, he succeeded. The victims deserve justice. Their families deserve closure. And somewhere, buried in old evidence or hidden in plain sight, the truth may still be waiting. The Zodiac's last confirmed letter was sent in 1974. He wrote, "Me equals 37, SFPD equals 0. He was keeping score. And in his mind, he'd already won. But this case isn't over. Not yet. Because as long as people keep searching, as long as investigators refuse to give up, the Zodiac's silence won't be the final word. The truth is still out there.